Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. Hopefully, we get some more people in here. Thank you for joining the Urban Indian Heritage Society for our presentation on Beyond Tulsa, Beyond the Black Smoke. We appreciate you for attending, and we look forward to talking about and diving a little bit deeper into the history leading up to the Tulsa massacre and really bringing some historical context and some clarity that will help us paint a little bit of a better picture regarding who these people were, what it meant for the land in this area, and the consequences of what took place 102 years ago. So I just want to say welcome to everyone. I want to introduce our wonderful panel. Tonight, our guest speaker is going to be Mr. Waltho Wesley, a native Oklahoman and also an American Indian man who will also help us, kind of dive a little bit deeper and share some of his insights as well as research that he's done on the area. And we look forward to hearing from you, Mr. Waltho, in just a few. We also have Sister Latasha Evans. Latasha Evans is also a member of the Urban Indian Heritage Society. She has lineage coming out of Oklahoma as well and will be chiming in on the topic with us tonight. We also have Brother Ishmael Bay from, First Tribe, firsttribenations.com, who's going to be also chiming in and giving us some insight on the Tulsa bombing of 1921. And if you're not aware of him, you have to make sure you check him out on Phoenix Moon's channel. Him, Phoenix, and Brother J Mar, I like to call them Three the Hard Way. They have a series going on right now called From Colonizers to Chiefs. And so we're super excited to hear from you as well, Brother Ishmael, today. Always a lot of insight coming from you. And then we have kind of lurking in the background there, Phoenix. We ain't gonna bug you too bad tonight, sis. But of course, our beautiful sister, Phoenix Moon, is in the building tonight, helping support the build. And so that's who's on the panel today. And then you have myself, Miss Sue Say Her, that's going to help facilitate this conversation and offer some of the things that I've researched as well to help bring it all together and bring you guys some information that you may not have known about the Tulsa Greenwood area and the inhabitants thereof. So, with that, again, we want to welcome you all to the build. Do me a favor if you can. Please like and share, subscribe to our YouTube channel here at the Urban Indian Heritage Society, and make sure that you share this link with a friend, a family member, anyone you know of that could really use this information. Okay. We want to make sure we do our best to try to get into the algorithm and, be able to reach more people regarding the information that we have at hand. So just wanted to say thank you all for joining again. And with that, give me one second. Let me get my other little device here together. Here we go. Get my other little device together here. And with that, we'll go ahead and get ready to get started in the build. But if you can, please get some more folks in here. And with that, we'll go ahead and get ready to get started in the build. But oh, Lord, pardon, excuse me. Mr. Waltho, I want to say welcome to the show. Y'all, give me one second. I'm really doing my best to get one of my other devices together here without it being loud and wrong. But Mr. Waltho, how are you today? How's it going?
I am well, and I hope everybody else is well. And I want to thank y'all for allowing me this moment of time to voice my opinion on this subject. This is a very interesting subject to me, and the one of the issues that we really need to kind of fight back on is this Africanization of the American Indians as it is being played out in Tulsa right now, and as it was played out here with the Juneteenth celebration in years past, especially this year. So I hope that the information I bring would be somewhat of an enlightenment to the people who are listening. And I hope to educate somebody on some parts of this that we may not have considered while we were looking into the history of the Tulsa race riots. And again, thank y'all for letting me show up.
Absolutely, Mr. Waltho. And I know that everybody, whether you're here listening live or if you're able to catch it a little bit later, you guys are definitely in for a treat. So we want to do our best to try to get some more of our supporters out there. Let them know that we are in the building. It's about to go down. Let's wake it up and look beyond that black smoke when we're talking about Tulsa and quote unquote Black Wall Street. Mr. Waltho, and really to everybody that's with us, I thought that the title of the bill, Beyond the Black Smoke, was very fitting because a lot of the information that we learn about the area and what happened there, in my opinion, is really clouded over with a lot of the smoke because there are a lot of nuances and historical things that, if you don't have that information, it's really hard to get more of a clear picture and understand the gravity of what actually took place in that area 102 years ago. And so we've laid out some information. Mr. Waltho is literally like the walking dictionary, walking Google, walking archives in that area. And so we have some things that we want to bring to you today, and make sure that, like I said, to really kind of look through that smoke, kind of let the smoke clear and get a better vision of the bigger picture, because it wasn't just quote unquote Black folks whose lives were affected by that. We really want to analyze the area, their origins, and what it meant for all of these things to be happening to this specific town, these specific peoples. And so I'm really excited about this. Y'all do me a favor. Let's get them likes and them shares out a little bit more. I'm going to make sure I share the room as well. Let me go on my little page here and share the room as well. And let's get some folks in here. Today marks the anniversary. So May 31st, 1921, going into the wee early mornings of June 1st, 1921. That is the infamous day that we've all heard about. But what we're going to do is kind of back it up a little bit. We've got to back it up a little bit, and let's get some context and kind of walk our way back to those events and really kind of analyze what it means for today, because there's still some lingering effects that are plaguing the world. I'm gonna say not just that area, but the world today, and we want to make sure that we do our best to minimize any erasure of the history of that area. So I'm gonna open it up and let's lay out the outline. So we know it happened 1921. We're gonna backtrack, guys. We're gonna take this conversation and start it back to the, we'll say, around 1830s or so. We'll just say pre-Oklahoma statehood. Okay. We'll start from pre-Oklahoma statehood. And Mr. Waltho, I'm gonna lean on you to really help paint the picture of the area before the influx of settlers and people looking for economic opportunity. Let's take it back to that area. Wasn't known as Tulsa then, but let's take it back to that area pre-Oklahoma statehood. What, for the audience, help us understand the area at the time, right? So we know that it became Oklahoma in 1907. That's fairly recent in the historical timeline, but I would love to get some decades prior to that to wake it up and really outline the area and paint a little bit of a better picture in that regard. So let's take it back, Mr. Waltho, and let's talk about Indian territory, because you can't really talk about Greenwood or Tulsa without talking about Indian territory. So if you can, whatever spot you feel is best, let's take it back a bit and walk people down and leading up until Oklahoma statehood, if you will.
Okay, for this exercise that we're about to embark on now, the history would probably be more contained in the allotment period. So we'll go from 1896 to 1914 because this process continued on even after statehood. You see what I'm saying? But we'll use that because what actually comes into effect when you start talking about the things that happened in Tulsa, I kind of hesitate to call it a massacre because I'm not exactly sure who was massacred, but we'll get into that. The things that happened And the people who were in Tulsa at that time, living in the Greenwood area, those would have been what we as freedmen. Hold on just a minute.
Okay, and while we wait for Mr. Waltho to come back, I hope you guys were able to hear him
Can
correctly
you
in
hear me
real
now?
time. Yeah, that's better. I was going to ask if you can repeat
Oh, Lord.
what you said about
Okay.
prior to
Wait a minute
statehood.
now. I got lost. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, because I can't hear nothing y'all said. Give me just a minute. Okay, how
Okay,
about say
well,
something? There we go. Now I got you. Okay.
okay.
What we the reason why I wanted to put it to the allotment time is because the people who were in Tulsa at that time would have been the freedmen from the Creek and the Cherokee nations. And the thing that made the so called, and I hate to call it Black Wall Street, but the thing that made it blossom was the minerals that was taken out from up under the lands that those freedmen held or received as part of their allotment process. You know, when
Now,
you get to
Mr. Waltho, if I could interject real quick, because I want to make sure that the audience understands the context of what you're speaking on. So you're saying, so prior to 1907, it was not known as Oklahoma, correct?
no,
It was
no,
considered Indian territory,
yes,
and
ma'am.
that's 1907. So that's even still 15 years, only 15 years prior to these have these bombings and all of that kind of the race, what they call the race riot. Only 15 years. And so prior to 1907, for the audience, it was known as Indian Territory, and Indian Territory was carved into different territories for different tribes, correct?
Yes,
So we're gonna. So what you're. It sounds like what you're about to do is really kind of tie the people who would have been in that area longer than 15 years now between statehood and the race riot. What you're doing, it sounds like, is you're tying these people to indigenous origins based on the fact that they were in what would have been considered Indian territory at that time. Do I have that right?
yes. Actually, at
Okay.
that time, they were still members of their respective tribes. The detribalization didn't start happening until after '79. So these were tribal members living in a tribal area, uh, gaining resources from tribal allotments. So everything about this should be based on their tribal affiliations and not some make believe African lineage. You see what I'm saying? These were not Africans, these were Indians, basically, is what I'm telling you. So that part of the story needs to be corrected because they want you to think that these were Africans when they really wasn't. But the heart of the deal is this: in the 1920s and a little previous before that, Tulsa became known as the oil capital of the world. But nobody's ever sat down and tried to figure out how they got that title. But the oil capital of the world came from the oil that was being taken from up under the a land that was allotted to those people you find there on Greenwood. It was those people down there on Greenwood who actually made Tulsa the oil capital of the world. See what I'm saying? And those allotments came based on their tribal connections. So, in a broad sense of the word, you can say that the Freedmen of the Creek and the Cherokee nations actually built Tulsa, and then it was taken away in the most heinous and illegal act that I've seen. See what I'm saying?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And I know we're going to get into it a little bit more as the conversation blossoms, but people really can't forget the aspect of these people owning land at a time when it's considered Indian territory, and you really do have to consider that there were laws and regulations governing Indian territory that was not necessarily the same for people who would have been considered part of the United States. You see what I mean? And so, in my mind, putting two and two together, if they're able to own land before Oklahoma is even a state, then that kind of put the picture together to me that I really need to evaluate the identity of these people, because they're not just Black people, because Black people would not have been able to just purchase land in that and during certain time frames prior to statehood, if I'm not mistaken, right? So it's
Well,
important. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Waltho.
well, in a way, you got to understand before Oklahoma could become a state, they had to do something with the five tribes. And their ideal, thanks to Senator Dawes, was to allot the land to the individual members of the tribe as a way of getting rid of the communal land and also allowing more land to be opened up for settlements from people from outside the tribe. So you have the Indian allotments that play in that particular area, and you also had the homestead allotments that would come into play also. But prior to 1907, there was no state of Oklahoma. You had Indian Territory and Oklahoma Territory, and the laws that governed both were not the same. Uh, that's a whole nother story that I'm not going to go into right now because that takes a lot of time. What I want to make clear is this: we're not talking about an unknown group of people coming into Oklahoma and setting up business and running with it like that. These were actual Indians. The majority of the so-called uh, state Negroes, is the term we use for them down here, came in right around statehood time or right after statehood was taken. So these people at no time would have been under the jurisdiction of the United States until after 1914 when the tribes was disbanded. Let's go back and look at these people though. If you go and look at the history books, you will see that you had a number of what they call all black towns that seem to pop up at the end of each trail that the Indians were taking into Oklahoma during removal. It's kind of a tradition down here, and this is where I'm going to stray a little bit, forgive me. It's kind of a tradition down here that although I may not live in my hometown, when I die, they take me back to my hometown and bury me. You see what I'm saying? So
Yes.
they're losing a large number of people digging in them holes up there in Tulsa, looking for the people who were killed there. You would have to individually locate them people and go back to their hometowns to find out if any of them got killed. So let's go and talk about this oil because the oil is the reason for the whole Tulsa race riot in the beginning. In 1921, you'll find that that was the high point of the Klan movement, especially in Tulsa. Matter of fact, Tulsa used to have some of the biggest Klan parades in the country. But these were underclass, so called white folks. And beside them was an upper class of these American Indians. The upper class of these American Indians controlled the wealth, they controlled the resources. And people from the other class decided that they did no longer want these Indians to hold on to these resources and launched an attack, which was quasi sanctioned by the state of Oklahoma because it was the sheriff of Tulsa who dropped bombs on that section of town.
Ooh, now
Kind
hold
of
on, now,
funny.
Mr. Waltho. Hold on. You said now. Wait a minute, because you hold on, because the hit. If any one of you can Google it right now, they'll tell you that they were never able to bring anyone to justice. They don't know who's responsible for these acts, all parties involved, and things of that nature. But you have said that the only person, I just want to make sure I heard you correctly, that the only person who could sanction things like that would have been the sheriff at the time.
Well, look at how it happened. They had to go get an airplane. and drop bombs on them from the sky. And the way I got it is that it was the sheriff who was actually doing the bomb dropping. He was the one that commandeered the airplane. So this makes them part of the problem also. You see what I'm getting at?
I,
They
I
played a part.
I can see, especially given that there weren't many legal proceedings outside of maybe some insurance claims type things that I've been able to find in research. So the fact that nobody,
You you
I'm
know
sorry, go
why?
ahead.
You know why? Because they tell you that it was a massacre. But sister, if they hadn't got into the airplanes, they wouldn't have massacred nobody. You're dealing with a group of people here that spent their whole entire life hunting to eat. They were quite familiar with guns. They owned guns. They had bullets. They owned the stores. They were well armed. See what I'm saying? No, look,
I
they done
do. If
cut
you,
me off.
there are some pictures, and I'll see if I can get it queued up. But there's a video on, I think it's tulsahistory.org. Don't quote me on that. I'll double check. There's a little 3-minute video clip, and they have some images of some of the citizens of Tulsa, and these people definitely had buku guns. They were heavily armed, things of that nature. So, I think that researching this, to your credit, it definitely helped me get out of the mind frame that these were helpless people and they just got overtaken and was not able
Well,
to fight back. And, yes.
one thing you got to understand is you have a group of people who not only had guns, they knew how to use guns and were very proficient in the use of those guns. See what I'm saying? So you're not going to run up on these people and just bulldog them into whatever you want them to be. They're going to fight back. And I contend that, because see, I remember my grandfather now, and them people was crack shots. You wasn't going to just run up on them and just do whatever you want to do. I don't know who they think they looking for in them graves up there in Tulsa, but they're not going to find our people in them graves. They're not.
Well, it's interesting you bring
That's
that
a
up
whole
because we're
smoke
gonna.
screen. That's a whole wait a minute. That's a whole smoke screen right there.
Well,
That is
regard. I
that
was gonna say.
because it
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
go ahead. Go ahead. No, you
No,
go ahead
I
and
was
finish.
gonna
Let me
say
hear what you got to
regarding
say.
being. Oh, I apologize. I think I'm getting the feedback. Go ahead, Mr. Waltho. My apologies.
No. You got to go work with it. Let me hear what you got. This is a conversation. See, I don't do just dissertations. I like conversations. I want to hear what everybody's got to say. So you tell me what's on your mind, and then we'll work this out.
Absolutely. No, you were mentioning about the DNA and everything, and I know that and that's definitely part of the conversation that we're going to have because if we can kind of give you a heads up on what's coming up for the audience. There's even today, as we build more on this subject, even today, as of just this past month, they are soliciting for DNA from people from certain areas. We'll get into it a little bit more, but this is still ongoing. Like this is not over with what happened in Tulsa in 1921. So I am glad you brought that up because it reminded me that we're going to discuss that a little bit in the build. But it to me is even more impactful to understand that we're trying to outline racial misclassification. These people are called and identified as something today that was very different, and these are people that would have had ancestry or would have been in these areas prior to Oklahoma even being a state. And prior to Oklahoma being a state is Indian territory. So you really, I can't tell you what to do, but I'm gonna say for me, it really helped me examine that. And then you fast forward that to today, where we're having these conversations about racial identity in America, especially between people who've been, misclassified as Black, amongst other things. So, you're hitting the nail on the money, and it's interesting how the past still has a tie and a hand into what's going on today. So, I just wanted to
Well,
just say that part.
just like they went through everything and whitewashed everything at one time, now they're going back and trying to blackwash everything. But either way it goes, in either wash, we get left out. They're not Indian washing nothing. You see what I'm saying? They're not giving you Indian history. They tell you these people is from Africa. They took that old lady all the way across the daggum ocean to try to convince you that she was an African. But
Well,
I
let's
guarantee you can't find an African connection to none of these people. My family came into Oklahoma in 1834 from Alabama. They were here when the start of the Civil War. They were the people that was driven off their lands in 1860 and 1861 and had to go to Kansas just to try to survive while these other folks, led by Albert Pike, was trying to kill them while they on the trail. You see? And then you have to come all the way up because the reclassification process started here real early in the game.
Can you speak
That
on
was
that just a
part of,
little bit more, Mr. Waltho, about the
well,
reclassification? Because that's a
okay, that's
very,
easy.
yeah. Well,
That's
I just
easy.
okay. Go
Check
ahead.
this
Go
out.
ahead.
When the option to come into Oklahoma, because that's what it was an option. People could come or they could stay. If you chose to stay behind, then you also chose to be reclassified as something that you wasn't. The lighter skinned Indians was classified as white folks. The darker skinned Indians was classified as Negroes. First set of laws in Oklahoma codified that classification in Oklahoma. You see? And it's through this reclassification that you get a term called Black Wall Street, which would have been Negro Wall Street, or it would have been Colored Wall Street. You see what I'm saying? Because black just got here. Black is an adjective. I'm sorry, it is
I
not a noun.
I think I did see something, Mr. Waltho, that identified it. It was originally coined Negro Wall Street, and if you, I don't know if Phoenix is still here to be able to get the pictures up, but even some of the photos that were photographed at that time, they're using the term Negro left and right under the descriptions.
Ah, wait a minute. Because see, a subtle difference in there. Because in the early 1820s is when the word Negro went from being starting with a lowercase n, which is a descriptive term and not a people, to an uppercase n. It went from an adjective to a noun. See what I'm saying? So even that was a reclassification because they went from describing the people to making them people the name that they described them under. And all they did was capitalize one letter. So it really wouldn't even been Negro Wall Street. See, this is the problem. They trying to stick this black nonsense on top of these American Indian people based on nothing more than their skin color. Nobody's went back to look at the genealogy on these folks because the genealogy is going to give you a whole different picture.
Mr. Waltho,
So now,
if I could,
go ahead.
I want to swing it back because you brought up genealogy, and if we're
Hmm.
considering the timeline of these events, right? Tulsa was May 31st and June 1st, 1921. We'll be generous and say 2 to 3 generations prior to that. That means that people's grandparents, or no, I would even say grandparents, people's parents, grandparents, and perhaps even their great grandparents, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, these would have been the people that would have been undergoing these different racial class reclassifications, misclassifications, the different changes in the lay of the land, how land was allotted, settlers coming in, things of that nature. And them at that time frame, they would have been the ones that would have endured, that last little push to really change things, and change, in terms of economics and land ownership, change the power dynamic to the U.S. government. Would that be a correct assumption? Like these would have been
Uh,
their parents, grandparents, great grandparents.
the reclassification started at the end of the Civil War, is when it truly started. The designation of freedmen actually didn't become a thing until we get to the Dawes Act of 1898. These people were not operating under those same classifications that they now have to be operating under. Before 1907, they were just Indians, and you were a member of whichever tribe you was a member of. But as time has gone on, and as this blackwashing and whitewashing has continued on, then you start seeing all these reclassification schemes, I think is the term they use for it, start happening here in Oklahoma too. But let's get back to Tulsa for just a minute. Uh, I was saying that these people in Tulsa, coming from the various Indian territories that they came from, because you would have had Creeks, Cherokees, Choctaws, Chickasaws, uh, Seminoles, they all would have been there or have some connection to there. You see what I'm saying? But all these people were not a bunch of scary people that just laid down and let these folks run over them. And they want you to think that they were so ill equipped to deal with this violence that they just laid down. But that's not the truth. These people were good at what they were doing. They had airplanes. Go back and look and see how many airplanes they own. Look at how many cars they own, how many businesses they own. These were not poor people. They wasn't gonna just lay down and give up their assets so easily. But they want you to think that these people had no fight in them. These so-called white folks just come rampaging through the community, killing and burning everything they wanted to. But I remember my grandfather and his friends. We were in Clearview, Oklahoma, and it wasn't no white folks running through there trying to talk about doing nothing because you wouldn't have got off the top of the hill, and they'd have opened fire on you. I don't accept that part of the story. I never will. And until they bomb those people's homes, they were not winning.
It's definitely evident to it's very evident that they were after the land and the resources, because one of the things that you touched on earlier that we haven't really dug too deep in is, um in the area of Greenwood, that housed one of the most top producing oil fields, at
Yep,
that time, right? And
yep.
this is before you get to the bombing and everything. You got to understand, you have look at the picture how it's laid out, and you guys have seen some of these images in a lot of the Tulsa commemorations and things of that nature. These people were balling; they had it together, and before you can get to these events, you have to understand that there were a lot of things that unfolded for it to even escalate to that point. And ultimately, we see today that that was the attempt to get them get a hold of their resources, the land and the
Well,
resources, that which has many
you
natural resources like oil and natural gas. And while you,
well you
I
had
want to hear from you, Mr. Waltz. I'm gonna pull some stuff up. I got some little notes here
okay.
about that oil and
What
stuff. I'm gonna chime in. Go ahead, Mr. Waltz.
why you talking about the oil and natural gas? See, when they issued the patent deeds, they issued the patent deeds with the mineral rights also. So that oil, they was taking it out from up under those people's lands, and they was paying those people for the oil that they was taking. Now, I sent you something. I think I did anyway. I should have, about the restrictions and the land restrictions on the allotments that they got. If the person who was originally issued the allotment were barred for 5 years from any encumbrances on that property. You couldn't lease it, you couldn't mortgage it, you couldn't have taxes filed on it. This land was secure. But if the original allottee died, then that land would come back to his heirs without those restrictions. So the game was to go through there and try to kill as many of these people as they could. So when their allotments came back without the restrictions, they could steal the land and they could steal the minerals that was up under the land without actually having to pay them people for those minerals. Those people should still be getting paid for the minerals taken off up under their allotments. But as soon as the original allottee died, then the vultures would come in and they would come up with these different schemes to get the land from these people. Sometimes they paid them, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they removed their restrictions in court, had the land placed on the tax roll, and then went back and told the people at the end of 3 years that y'all got to go because we sold your land. So the whole object of the game, and it played out for quite a while here in Oklahoma too, was people would come up dead mysteriously. And then you notice on down the line that those allotments start changing hands. So what they were trying to do was get rid of the original allottees so they could steal the land and therefore take over as the oil capital of the world. Mm-hmm. But that was the play. It wasn't about no race or none of that. It's all greed. And the fact that they couldn't get their hands on those allotments and the mineral rights until those original allottees were dead. Now, the allotment process stopped in 1914. So from 1914 to 1921, the majority of the original allottees were still alive. We got to get rid of these people. And this was one of the ways that they tried to do it. And it almost backfired until, like I said, they had to get in the planes and go down there and shoot. I mean, start dropping bombs on these people. That's the only way. But the whole reason for the whole process was for them to be able to steal the land. It was those restrictions. You got that whole process was crazy, man. But they gave you an allotment and they gave you 40-acre homestead is what they called it, which was never supposed to be taxed. It was never supposed to be encumbered, and it was supposed to remain in your family forever. See what I'm saying?
I do, and I just for context for the audience in that area of Greenwood, it tells you let me make sure I got it right. It's called the Tulsa Field. It's also known
Yep,
as the Red Fork Field. It's
yep.
in Tulsa County, and it was discovered in 1901. So this is 20 years prior to the foolishness. So it was discovered in 1901. It was one of the most important oil producing areas in the state by 1920. And then it says here, and they were producing over 600,000, barrels of oil within
Per
the
day.
first year. And then it says, in addition to oil, the Tulsa field also produced large amounts of natural gas. And this led to
Hmm.
the development of pipelines and other infrastructure to transport and distribute the gas. And that source is from the Oklahoma Historical Society. And some of these get like,
Hmm.
and Mr. Waltho, and we could talk about that. I don't know how how deep you want to go into it, but even with understanding the natural resources that would be gained by running these people out or even killing them, today, if you fast forward to today, some of these popular oil companies that we know of had business dealings coming out of Oklahoma because again that was one of the largest oil producing areas at that
In
time.
the country. Well, actually, in the world at that time. Yes.
There you go. There you go.
Yes. See, it was an economic war that they're trying to turn into a race war because they need to be able to add this false narrative about who these people were to the story. They can't tell you that these people were Indians because then you can see that this was an attack on American Indians, orchestrated and sanctioned by the state of Oklahoma and the city of Tulsa,
Mr.
in,
Waltho.
com-
Oh, I'm sorry.
in complete violation of the 1866 treaty, where it says we were not supposed to be at war on either side, but yet and still they sanctioned a war against us right there. Now, how
Mr.
come
Waltho.
we're not talking about this treaty violation? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I always think you pause it and then I would come in and then oops. So my apologies, y'all. Forgive me. I'm over here.
It's
I'm
all right.
super pumped
It's
and
all right.
super excited about the information. So I'm a little giddy. But I want to make sure people understand that again, remember y'all, Oklahoma was not a state until 1907. This Tulsa oil field was discovered in 1901, so this was still Indian territory.
Yep.
So to back you up with what you're saying about the identity of these people, you got to use your context, literally read it, but then also your common sense ought to tell you, if this is a time where American Indians would have been in this territory, they had land, not just no anybody could have come in and had land ownership in that area for a good long time as well. To me, it just puts two and two together. And again, people need to consider the time frame. This is not a long time between all these different events happening. You mentioned the Dawes Act of 18 was it 1887.
1898.
1890, yeah, 1898. So this is still that same time
Mm-hmm.
frame where they're discovering oil. You got people trying to come in and settle to get them a little piece of it. You have all this legislation that's taking place, reclassifying people, misclassifying people, changing the dynamics of land acquisition and ownership and things like that. So, just put it all together, audience, as we're talking about this stuff. Just make sure you put it all together. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, yeah, you had a whole different ball game going on, but it was the desire to control those resources that actually led Oklahoma into becoming a state. Only by making Oklahoma a state and breaking up the tribes could they get control of the resources. See what I'm saying? So they had to
Absolutely.
attack in order to secure this state that they call Oklahoma now. In 1898, this was not Oklahoma. This was Indian territory. Land had not been distributed. People lived wherever the hell they wanted to live. However much land you thought that you could tend to, that's how much land you used. But it was never nobody's land. Because it was nobody's land, there was nobody collecting the royalties. And because it was common use land by the Indian tribes, the oil companies didn't really have a way to get into Indian territory until they came up with the Dawes Act, which is highly illegal, very illegal. They shouldn't even been allowed to come in here using the Dawes Act. The Dawes Act, in effect, in Oklahoma and Indian Territory, was an illegal act. So they were stealing from the gate. And they continued to steal and try to hide their theft ever since. So now you got to be an African so they don't feel guilty about stealing your stuff. Because according to Article 2 of the 1866 treaty with the Muskogee Creek Nation, an African had no interest in the land. Look up the word interest and you'll see that the synonym for interest is rights. They turned them into Africans so they didn't have a right to the land. See what I'm getting at? This
I
was
get it.
legalized theft. This was the legalized theft of Indian territory. And this legalized theft kept on in Indian territory until this day. So there's still people here in this state that still hold their original allotments. And one false move by any of them people, they gonna take them allotments. You got the fire tribes down here now claiming jurisdiction over Indian territory, but they don't own Indian territory. The so-called freedmen own Indian territory. The so-called freedmen is the ones who have the right to the royalties from the minerals that was taken from Indian territory. And it's not just oil and gas. Choctaw Nation was timber. The Chickasaw Nation was coal and asphalt. The Seminole Nation is gas and oil. The Creek Nation is gas and oil. The Cherokee Nation is a gas and oil. But the nations didn't own
Mr.
the
Waltho,
land.
can you
Go ahead.
I was gonna say you mentioned thank you, Phoenix. I think Phoenix is putting up some of the photos of some of the maps you sent me of Oklahoma
Hmm.
territory. And then we have one up here from 1868, Indian Territory in 1868, and there's some other ones. We'll try to get them up that shows you just how they chopped and screwed these areas. But before we go there, I wanted to swing it back to something. This was something that you discussed in a private conversation between you and I, and you woke it up about the Freedmen. You were talking about the Freedmen, and you woke it up by the Freedmen, and you made a distinction between freedmen and freedmen by blood. And so I wanted to know if you could speak on that as it relates to the people that would have been in this Tulsa Greenwood area, for what it meant for their descendants, and just whatever insight you can give
Well,
us regarding that.
well, there's a category that goes along with that freedom. And if you start looking at the enrollment jackets, you'll see on some of those enrollment jackets the designation BBFR. BBFR stands for By Blood Freedmen. These are Indians who come from another tribe and want to join with the other tribe. And part of the adoption process is you have to accept the classification of freedmen. A Choctaw can't go to the Creek Nation and be a by-blood Creek. See what I'm saying? He could come into the nation through adoption, but he couldn't come to the nation by blood. So they made another category called by blood freedmen because you only had two categories in Indian territory. You had freedmen and Indians. See what I'm getting at? So
Yes.
these by blood freedmen were Indians that crossed from one nation to another nation. There's a guy in my family, uh, a great uncle named Johnson, Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson was a Creek citizen, but when he came over to the Seminole Nation, he had to come over to the Seminole Nation as a freedman because he's a Creek, not a by blood Seminole. Somewhere down the line, they removed the by blood part of the freedman designation, and they all just became freedmen. But that by blood is still on those allotment jackets. See what I'm getting at? Now I have, my nephew has, uh, an index to the Dawes Road that shows all these people that they call in freedmen are actually Indians. That we had the paper documentation for. We have the road. And
Oh wow.
They wasn't considered Africans then. They were considered Indians by blood. But in order to steal the land, they can't take it from an Indian because of the 25-year restriction. They classified them as freedmen, dropped the by blood part, gave them a 5-year restriction, and in 5 years they would figure out a way to steal the land from their people. But that category, you don't see that category. You can look through the Oklahoma History Succession. Society. You can go to the Oklahoma Pioneer Papers and the University of Oklahoma, which I would suggest everybody take a trip over there and look at because some real interesting reading going on in that part of the world. But you don't see the classification by blood freedmen's listed anywhere now, except on their enrollment jackets. And that's what piqued my curiosity because my great great grandmother on her enrollment jacket, it has BBFR. So it took me almost 6 months to figure out what BBFR stood for. See what I'm saying?
Mr. Waltho, I do have a question, if I may ask, sir.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Cousin Phoenix, can I do the share screen just so I can ask Mr. Waltho this question, if I may?
Let me see if I can see your screen.
Okay. I'd like to ask a question about the 1866 treaty, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, in the 1866 treaty, you will have the different articles of the treaty itself of 1866. And
Mm-hmm.
in that, as far as what we're pulling up right now, is the 1866 treaty. And there's always a focus. Now, as y'all can see, this is from the Oklahoma State University treaty with the Creeks of 1866. And they focus on the Article 2. So I'd like to read to you the Article 2. And then, if I may ask you, is there a part that they're not highlighting? So
Mm-hmm.
in this Article 2 of the treaty for the public, it says, the Creeks hereby convene and agree that henceforth neither slavery nor involuntary servitude otherwise than in the punishment of crimes, whereof the parties shall have been made duly convicted in accordance with laws applicable to all members of said tribe, shall ever exist in said nation, inasmuch as there are among the Creeks many persons of African descent who have no interest in the soil. It is stipulated that hereafter these persons lawfully residing in said Creek country under their laws and usages, or who have been thus residing in said country and may return within 1 year from the ratification of this treaty, and their descendants in such others of the same race as may be permitted by the laws of the said nation to settle within the limits of the jurisdiction of the Creek Nation as citizens thereof shall have and enjoy all the rights and privileges of native citizens, including an equal interest in the soil and national funds, and the laws of the said nation shall be equally binding upon and give equal protection to all such persons and all others of whatsoever race or color who may be adopted as citizens or members of said tribe. That is the Article 2 of the treaty. Why do they focus on that? And is there another part that they're not emphasizing in your wisdom, sir? And then we can go over the part
Yeah.
that you may highlight.
Okay. Now, Article 2 gives you these Africans, although they never specify who these Africans are, all rights and protections of the Indian nation, right?
Yes.
Okay. These people have never been identified, and they were only allowed to live in the nation under the laws that were enacted by the nation at that time. Now that's 1866. I want to point you back to 1863,
Yes, sir.
the Homestead Act. So you would have people coming in the Oklahoma territory, and Sue, I sent her the map last night to show her the extent of Indian territory at that time.
Mm.
So they could be living anywhere in that area under the Homestead Act. But instead of being governed by the United States government, they were governed by the nations that was there. Now, to answer your question, read Article 4.
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. So we read Article 2, and Mr. Waltho saying, read Article 4. Article 4. Immediately after the ratification of this treaty, the United States agreed to ascertain the amount due to the respective soldiers who enlisted in the federal army, loyal refugees, Indians, and freedmen in
Stop.
proportion. Yes, sir.
Stop. Hold it right there. This is the point. Article 2 gives you a group of people who were not a part of the tribe but were living with the tribe. Article 4 specifies who the treaty is actually written for.
Yes, sir. It says federal army, loyal refugee Indians, and freedmen. Yes, sir. It says it right
So
there.
the correct title for that treaty is the Treaty of 1866 with the loyal Indians, freedmen, and refugees. So now you got Article 2 taking these people out from up under their treaty protections and just allowing them to live in the land. And while Article 4 is specifically putting them under treaty protection. See what I'm
Wow.
getting at?
Yes, sir. I see exactly what you're getting at.
This is part of the theft. They, if you go look at the 1866 treaty, go look at who signed that treaty. See, we finna have to deal with that.
Right.
Look at who signed the treaty.
We have the signatures that are right here on the actual treaty, and we invite
And
the
one of
people. Go ahead, sir.
one of them name is Cal Tom.
Yes, sir. We see Kyle Miko and his X mark right here.
Okay.
We see it right here.
Okay. Well, Cal Tom in during the allotment period was enrolled as a freedman.
Yes, sir.
When you gonna get an African signing an Indian treaty?
That would be a foreigner.
Right. And also look at they got him listed as an interpreter, but you'll see the name Harry Island on that list also.
Mr. Waltho, I'm sorry. Let me 1 second, you all. We're getting a little bit of a feedback.
Yeah, I'm hearing it too.
Are you? Can we all let's just all mute up while one person's talking? I know Brother Issue and him are going back and forth. I think when both of your mics are open at the same time, it's getting a little feedback.
Well, Harry Island wrote the Treaty of 1866. He is also on the rolls as a freedman. Now, how are these Africans negotiating, writing, and signing a treaty when they have no interest in the land? Which, in other words, like I said, means they had no rights in the land. These people want you to stay as an Article 2 African without your treaty protections instead of being an Article 4 freedman with full protection, and they still owe you money. My grandmother put in a claim, so you can find these people in southern Kansas in 1861. My grandmother made a claim to the federal government for $736 for the property that was destroyed when these mixed breeds and these intermarried whites attacked the rest of the tribes and forced them into Kansas. That Article 4 tells you that we owe them some money. My grandmother only collected $200 out of her $729 claim. There's money still owed on that debt.
Yes, sir. And
You
the
see what
other
I'm
part,
saying?
I do indeed. Yes, sir. And the other part of that question is, as you accurately stated, we have here from the BBC, Tulsa race massacre survivors granted Ghanaian citizenship. That's the
Yeah.
mother of Viola Fletcher and her younger brother,
Hmm.
Hughes Van Ellis, are said to be the oldest African Americans to be granted citizenship of Ghana. So Miss Viola Fletcher, at the age of 108 years old, and her brother at 102 years old are two of the three living survivors being granted Ghanaian citizenship, being flown over to Ghana in order to be. Why are they overemphasizing this African identity on these Tulsa survivors? What would you
Well,
say?
now, listen to how you phrased that. They didn't say that those people were African. They just said they got citizenship in Africa. That's the colonization society story.
Yes, that's right. Granted Ghanaian citizenship. Yes, sir. I see
They
exactly
don't
what
call
you
them
mean.
Africans. They don't call them Africans. But these other folks out here seen that little bird and decided that they were granted citizenship in Africa because they were African. But nowhere in that piece that you just read were they ever called an African.
Right. Yes,
It's a
sir.
it's a it's a psychological game that they're playing with these words, man. But they want these people not to have an interest in the land because the ultimate game plan is this: we gonna take your patents and give your patent deeds to people that we think deserve your patent deeds. And because you have no interest and you have no rights to those patents that you're walking around here claiming as yours.
Mr. Walter, I thank you so much for taking the time in order to break down the legal parts of the treaty, as well as being able to highlight that answer the question that I asked. I yield the floor, and I thank you so much for that, sir.
Well, Ish, me and you had this conversation once before, I believe,
Yes, sir.
about your cousin, because he's actually helping perpetrate this fraud when he calls these people African.
Yes, sir. I agree. Complicit indeed.
You see what I'm saying? Yes, and this is how the game is played. They are working overtime to try to make you be an African. They even went so far as to sending a whole college department down here, giving these people DNA tests, trying to prove them to be Africans. And after they came and gave them the DNA test, guess what? We ain't never heard nothing back from the DNA test.
Right. Yes, sir.
You see what I'm saying? Because it don't go where they want it to go. So now you just gonna have to accept you an African and just go with it when they have no proof of any of these so-called Africans. And if they did start proving them, then they're gonna have to start proving these Portuguese people that's perpetrating this lie.
What Mr. Waltho is explaining to the public is that the Freedmen group had hired Dr. Rick Kittles to come in and do the DNA studies on
Thank you.
them. And upon Dr. Rick Kittles doing their DNA studies, to the dismay of the freedmen, a couple of things happened. One was they found out that their quote unquote DNA was no different than the average quote unquote African American. So there was
Hmm.
no more additional admixture of indigenous DNA within that which was being tested. Also, it didn't push their particular narrative of what they were looking for, as far as not only having a higher DNA marking about, but they would be able to use those results in order to push a certain type of a narrative. So it was
Yep.
unexpected result. And actually, Dr. Rick Kittles was a little intimidated because they were really upset with the findings, as if blaming the messenger, but that's who they
Well,
called over to do it.
here's one thing: Oklahoma being the prison camp that it is, these people have been here for an extended amount of time. If they were to have a large amount of African DNA, it would have showed up on their test. I don't
Yes,
know what the hell indigenous DNA is. I don't remember them having a marker for indigenous nothing. Because even the people they call it indigenous and Native Americans, their markers are going to go back to Siberia.
that is correct.
So all they said is these people ain't nothing but Americans.
And peace to the room, everyone. I just wanted to make a point there, Uncle Waltho, of what you're saying in regards to the African people in that area, or the supposed Africans in that area. What we all know, and they do tell us the story about the entrepreneurs and the well blown businesses that were full blown in that area at the time. They don't talk to you about who owned them and the names of the people. And I think it actually tells a story when you know the names of the schools, the people, the streets, that kind of thing. Um, there in one area, the Marquee district of Greenwood, which was the Marquee block, the 100th block of Greenwood Avenue, there were over 100 businesses that were owned by American Indian people. This land, as you just stated, was land that was given to these people. So there wasn't a period of time where um, they didn't own it, right? This was just a development. So they had started to develop businesses in this area. Going through the names of those businesses in that marquee area, the Williams Confectionery, Little Rose Beauty Salon ran by Miss Little, Jones Little, Mary Jones Parish School, the Wesley Jones Physician's Office, Thomas Gentry's Real Estate, the Earl Real Estate Company. The Oklahoma Sun newspaper was owned by the family that also owned the cigar shop, the Aquaqua cigar shop, Brashears and Franklin, the attorneys, and oil deals. Okay, I just sent some pictures to Sooth. Hopefully, she can post them and show the oil fields that were adjacent to Greenwood Avenue that were all owned by the people that also owned a lot of these businesses. There were shoe shiners, barbers, three churches, AME churches at the time. These aren't African culture, names, or events. The Tulsa Star newspaper was also owned by the people in that area, by the Williams family. The Liberty Plumbing Shop was owned by the Jones family. So it's just the list goes on and on. There were several hotels in that area, the Ferguson Drug Store, the Smith, who owned all of the Red Wing barbershops, hotels, tailoring companies, cafes, all in this area. There was Railway. There was also the Aquaqua Post Office, okay, right there in Greenwood as well. So these names don't lend to anything that would give you a notion of an African presence. They actually tell you very much different. And I think when we actually look at who is in the area at the time and we look at the names of the people at the time, it makes it kind of easier to understand what was happening in that area.
Hmm.
Peace, Latasha. I'm back. My phone died. I apologize, y'all. It was cutting up over here, but I was just messaging Phoenix because there's a link from the, I think it's oklahomahistory.org. I'm gonna double check. Please don't quote me on that link, but it has quite a few pictures of the areas and a lot of those places as well. And if we could get that, we can kind of just kind of scroll through some of just a couple of them together. They have some real, interesting images, and you get a chance to see what these people look like. You get a chance to see the buildings and what they look like. Um, so I don't know if we can get that. If not, I don't know if you're still able to share your screen, Brother Ish. I can send you the link. I don't know if he's busy or not.
I'll be able to find it if you can't supply the link in the back. I can find it.
Okay, I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you. Give me 1 second. And while I'm getting that link, Latasha, or not Latasha, pardon, Mr. Waltho, you didn't say it outright, but you were touching on a lot of things that are important to genealogy and genealogical research, like having those documents or like surnames and looking up the history and land patents and this things of that nature. Um, I think that's an important point for everybody, especially if you have ancestry tied to these areas. You might want to, try to dig a little bit deeper and see what you come up with and really analyze the history. Because, like Mr. Waltho's been laying out all of this stuff, when you consider the genealogy and you consider, land ownership and things of that nature, and natural resources, then it to me it kind of changes the game a little bit or a lot of bit. It changes the game, and really makes me want to analyze my own family story even further, because if it can be that wild for people having ancestry coming out of Indian territory, y'all know it's been off the chain all over this place. So I just wanted to highlight that you kind of low-key was talking about that, Mr. Waltho, but very important to note that. And then also too, I didn't want to forget too, Latasha, that I know you had some stuff you wanted to share while we get these pictures coming up. Do you want to kind of share some of your experience with having ancestry coming out of the area?
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you for that. So, just basically kind of going over what we were saying. My family as well, also on my mother's side, her father is from the Oklahoma area, and his mother and father were there at the time when it was called Indian Territory. Um, we see a lot of our families still in that area, and they now call it Clearview, is the area that they call it now. And me and Mr. Waltho actually have some similar people within um, our lines that we could know that they met each other or crossed paths within that area. Um, the A lot of the Indian territory that we're finding, especially the names that I was just explaining to you, are a lot of the same last names that we carry today. And I know that there has always been a concerted effort to tell us that these were African names, or some sort of African lineage was tied to these, and or that these people particularly were either slaves and given a white last name. Um, it's peculiar that you can see how that plays out in this area, because what you'll see is the land ownership, a lot of the patents, the oil fields are all in the names of these so-called slave names, or African people. Um, so the story just doesn't line up. I have a Williams in my family line from that area, and we'll see that Williams actually owned a lot of property in that area, a lot of businesses, movie theaters, that kind of thing. So, and also land. So what you'll find is there's not really a direct line that you can draw from, just as Mr. Waltho was talking about, some sort of African history, if they were going to be landowners in that area. And this is all preceding this 1921 so-called, what they say, massacre. You'll also see that most of the people that lived in that area as well were war veterans. My grandfather, his father before him, they were all veterans. There were a lot of Union soldiers that had moved into this area coming out of Arkansas, Mississippi, um, some of those surrounding areas. different tribes, right, that we know that were sectioned off by the government later on. But in that massacre, they even claimed that there were about 300 Union soldiers that were deceased. However, they don't talk about on the other side of the tracks how many people were lost in that other community, right? They never talk about that, and I think that's where a part of Mr. Waltho's point in regards to the bombings. The bombings were what actually made it the massacre, because prior to that, if anyone actually looks at that story of how the fighting and the riot actually started, was in regards to a man and a woman in a situation about a woman dating a black man dating a white woman. um, when he was jailed, the Union soldiers came there, over 100 of them, to come tell them that they were going to provide him protection. So you have to ask yourself, under what law would it be that if someone were put in jail for something, that people would show up and say, hey, hand that person over to us. We will provide protection for that person until they see the court. That would probably be
Let,
landowners.
let me add something to that because
Thank you.
you said something real interesting right there. They tell you about everything but the fact that when that child, because it wasn't a man, it was a child, and he bumped into a lady in an elevator
That's
and he
right.
got arrested for that. But they don't tell you that those people from over there in the Greenwood district actually came downtown and demanded that they release that child.
Yes, they
This
did.
is the reason why they had to bring the military in, because the war would have started right there. The military came in to try to diffuse the conflict,
Let's also
but
make it
they,
clear that she recanted her statement. She was 17, he was 19. She
yep.
recanted her statement. However, the ball was already in motion before they were able to stop it.
Well, that's the difference between actually having a reason, if you could come up with a reason good enough for what they did. But that's the difference between having a reason and people being fueled by just raw greed.
Yes, sir.
You see what I'm
Exactly.
saying?
Exactly. There was an
Because
underlying.
the root of the whole Tulsa incident was not race, although race eventually started to play a part in it. It was greed. These people were succeeding very well, and it was a direct threat to the people who actually wanted to say that they were running things. You see what I'm saying? How can we run anything when them niggas over there got all the money? So
And we're
they
buying
had to
out
go get the
all of
money.
the, yes, and they were
That's
buying out
right.
the area and expanding. They had
Yep.
grown in population by 72,000 within 10 years. They
Yep.
had opened up 4 new churches. There was plans for a new post office, and the real estate was booming. They were purchasing homes across the tracks, and this was a
And
disruption.
when you look at the economics of the people involved, you will see that there were nobody on the economic ladder higher than those people over in Greenwood. So their opposition would have been of a lower social status, I guess we can say,
That is
and
correct.
that played a big part in it too, because here
Yes,
comes the greed. Remember, part of that whole operation was the looting of the houses and the businesses that they had drove people out of. You can see that they did the same thing at the start of the Civil War when they drove the people off of their land and sent them into Kansas. So they just tried to repeat what they had already done earlier. But the
and
main part of it was an economic war. And I don't know who the hell they expect to find up there in them graves But I'd be real surprised if they find a whole bunch of us. That would just be a surprise to me.
If somebody can press the play button at the bottom of the screen, it'll scroll through some of the pictures where you'll see what some of the buildings look like and the aftermath. Now, considering everything that's been laid out, look at the aftermath.
Yeah, it's when the government of the state of Oklahoma launched a last attack against the American Indians. Then you get all the reclassification stuff starting hitting. You thank Woodrow Wilson for that if you got to find somebody. Because he's the one, he was like grand wizard number one in this country during his presidency. Now, after 1921, you get 1924 and the reorganization of the five tribes. See what I'm getting at? So they killed off or removed as many of the original people as they could, and then came back in with some new people and said, "Y'all the Indians." Goes along with that first constitution of the Choctaw Nation. We the people who are representing the people of the Choctaw Nation.
Mr. Waltho, you know what
Hmm?
that makes me think about? In a lot of the
What?
social media spaces where there are these discussions about identity and history, a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, look at the Native Americans today. They don't look, they don't look like any of you, that kind of thing. And then, so
Yeah,
that's what we mean. You have to understand the context of history and
yeah.
why, things the way they are right now.
That's how they can say that. But if you go and look at the allotment process, you see like there's 39 tribes here in Oklahoma. It wasn't just people of the five tribes up here applying for those allotments. You had Plains Indians coming up here applying for those allotments too. Now, ain't it kind of interesting that all the people they call Native American in these five tribes now look like the Plains Indians from out west? They follow the same cultural practices as the Plains Indians from out west. See,
Things that make you go, hmm.
and
well,
Siberia.
I talk to Chief quite frequently. I got to call her here in a little bit. Uh, and she can tell you about her grandfather used to come into Oklahoma every 10 years. And when he would come into Oklahoma, he would bring provisions for his people because they were still struggling to find food. And he started noticing when he would come up here to visit with his people and do his tribal business, that when he went by his people's houses, his people wasn't staying there. And there would be other people standing in those people's houses using his family's name, telling him if he don't get the hell off their property, they gonna kill him. So he went back to Louisiana and told the Choctaw down there, don't take yourselves into Oklahoma, they trying to kill you. And that rule stood in place until 3 years ago or 4 years ago when Chief came up here to Oklahoma to see about me. And wouldn't you know it, when she came here, Lizard came out to the house, and I'm gonna call him Lizard. Anybody want to know who he really is? You have to get on me from one of the back channels. And came out to the house and told Chief, people that come up here and stir up trouble end up dead. And let that sink in. 'Cause that was only 3 years ago, and this same threat is still in effect to this day. In Oklahoma, one thing is a fact: the closer you get to the truth, the more your life becomes endangered. This is how hard they work to suppress who you are inside this prison camp that they call Oklahoma. Because Indian Territory was just that, a prison camp. And the state of Oklahoma, or let me put it this way, the amount of land owned by the tribes prior to 1866 was a considerably larger chunk of land than they tell you is Indian territory now. The Seminole Nation went all the way over to the western border of Oklahoma. See, but as they come in, they steal the land. And as they steal the lands, then they start the reclassification process, which they finished in 1907 when they wrote the law that Native Americans was white and American Indians was black. This is that whole process played out in real time. And it's still playing out to this day because if you stand up and say, I'm not an African, I'm an American Indian, your life is in danger. You become the most hated thing on the block once you make that declaration. They want you to be an Article 2 African so you can't enforce the treaty. But look at what the Cherokee Nation did. They removed what they call a by blood stipulation from their constitution, and within 6 months, the federal government gave them $1.8 billion. These other four tribes can't enforce the treaty benefits without the people who are actually part of the treaty. They lost their power. They don't want you to lose. They don't want you to know that they lost their power, but they have no rights to that treaty because they're themselves are standing in violation of Article 4 of that treaty. The treaty's actual name: Loyal Indians, Freedmen, and Refugee Indians. That's who that treaty was written for. And if you go back to the correspondence that they were putting out in 1865, in 1866, in 1867, 1868, you will see that they knew specifically who they was talking about. But the people that they were specifically talking about are the people that are being excluded from the treaty today. Why? And the only two classifications for that is either greed or racism. There's no other reasons that it could be. There's no other foundation they could stand on. Greed is what destroyed Greenwood. Racism played a part in the greed that destroyed Greenwood. They walk hand in hand with each other. So, because of greed and racism, you no longer have a claim to the treaty that was written for you, signed by you, and written by you. See what I'm getting at?
Absolutely. And so last year in
It's
July, go ahead. I'm sorry, Mr. Waltho.
no. Go ahead.
Uh,
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm gonna listen.
oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. You were flowing.
No, that's all right. You know I can go on and on. So interrupt me if you need to, because I may get carried away on you.
Oh no, you were cooking. You were cooking. I'm so sorry. I just heard a break and I thought you were done. So I was just going to mention that the 1866 treaties and what he's talking about. This is still an effort today that they keep trying to sneak in little opportunities to play with the treaties. Right. So this is not an effort that's dead and gone. It happened, and now we're they're literally still here in 2000s trying to manipulate the wording. The fact that the freedmen were supposed to be African slaves, they tried to manipulate that just last year in July. Urban Indian Heritage Society, as most of you know, went to Congress and we went to speak on behalf of the American Indians, not only ourselves by blood, but our family members and ancestors from that particular area that were named freedmen, but under the Article 2 wording is what's being manipulated today, and not the fact that they should have been considered under the Article 4 as Mr. Waltho has just educated all of us on. We spoke there with Maxine Waters that were there. Mrs. Van, Marilyn Van, who is a culprit in the Oklahoma community, trying to Africanize our ancestors. We spoke with all of them that day, and we let them know. Not only did we do that, several of the people that are here in the chat, a part of the organization, sent letters. I think almost 1,000 of us had letters sent to show them that not only do we specifically want them to address the fact that they are misinterpreting the treaty, but over and above that, that you are looking at in people who are from this area and telling them that because of the Freedmen classification that they are African. And so now we can look at, because of the fact that another part of the treaty says that Africans have no interest in the land, we can construe these two things and remove people from their land allotments. We spoke up that day, and they've continued it, and they haven't once come back to talk about it again. But understand it's going to take, as we are doing today, to not only talk about these types of things, but to continue to make sure that we don't fall for the grift. Because every few years they're going to try to come back and they're going to try to play a game, but we will be there. And we're hoping that all of you guys will be there with us. But this is a specific example of what Uncle Waltho was just talking about, is that in 1866, when they made this egregious situation, they're now trying to manipulate it to say that the people there, and this Black Wall Street narrative is a specific example of that, that those people were Africans. And so the allotments that they received, this is still oil. You can't remove oil land from being oil land. This is still a very, very lucrative mineral place in the middle of the United States. And we know that the United States as a corporation is fighting for assets and money right now. So why wouldn't they continue to try to play with our land in that area? We have to stay diligent in that place.
I wanted to read something into the record. I'd be remiss if I didn't. It's from the University of Michigan. Snapping turtles. Snapping turtles will eat nearly anything that it can get its jaws around. They feed on dead animals, insects, fish, birds, small mammals, amphibians, lizards, and a surprisingly large amount of aquatic plants. Mess around if you want to. I yield the floor.
They feed on people too.
I was just thinking about that. Fingers get close enough.
Yep.
That's one thing you learn real
I'm
quick. Don't
focusing
trust
on
no
the
snapping
lizards.
turtle.
Well, I know of people that looks just like a lizard. You can find me a snapping turtle. I sure could use it because
Well,
he really upset me.
I tell you what, y'all have really just wow. This is just wall to wall information. I know y'all kind of touched on it a little bit, and I'm gonna kind of ping to you a little bit, brother Ish and Mr. Walter. Of course, I love to hear your comments on this, but you guys mentioned it a little bit about these bodies that they're exhuming out of, was it Oaklawn Cemetery in
Hmm.
Tulsa? And they are
Hmm.
soliciting people. They've narrowed down some surnames from specific states. A lot of them are in the southeast, and they're wanting people to submit to DNA tests to match with these bones, pretty much, right? So I wanted to know, if you guys could speak to that, especially now that we have the understanding that we have about Tulsa, its inhabitants, and the land that these people are buried in. You know what I mean? So I wanted to know what you guys' thoughts were with that, and if anybody has the link,
Yeah, I do.
you could, okay, awesome. And I hope y'all saw some of these pictures scrolling across. We'll put the link to that. We'll get the link to that in the chat. Y'all, if y'all give me a second to look through all these pictures, and I apologize, I didn't give a little warning because there are some really sensitive images in these files, and so view at your own discretion, okay? But some very powerful pictures from those time frames surrounding the Tulsa um, riots and massacre, whatever you want to, all the different names they give it. So we'll put that in the chat. But I want to see if we can switch to you, Brother Ish, with that article, and let's chop it up a little bit about that, and then we'll open the floor for questions if anybody wants to come up, and then we'll get some closing comments from everyone.
Yes, sis, no problem. If we could stop the share screen, that way I could take them to the actual page, please. So what we have is, I'm gonna pull it up and see what we have here for you. So I posted up on the page firsttribenation.com. You'll see the newest article. It's dealing with tonight's show, Tulsa Beyond the Black Smoke. It also has the first link, which will lead you to Urban Indian Heritage Society. Please feel free to go directly to the page. You'll also see our live video that's going on, taking place right now. But another part of it also deals with the Tulsa Race Massacre. Investigators say that they've sequenced DNA from 6 possible victims. So it has the article here. And if you click the link that's on the page, it'll take you here to the page. So what it says is that, as Sister Sooth had accurately said, Dr. Fallon, that a team of researchers hoping to identify victims of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre said Wednesday that they had completed DNA sequencing of 6 sets of human remains exhumed from the city's Oak Lawn Cemetery, where bodies of the Black residents killed in the violence are thought to have been buried. So it goes on later on to say, Bynum said that 22 sets of remains have been exhumed from the cemetery so far, but that experts are not yet sure if any of them were massacre victims. However, the DNA results would allow researchers to make a match with possible living relatives. So it goes on later to say that the 1921 Tulsa massacre left upward of 300 African Americans dead and resulted in the destruction of Black Wall Street, unquote, in the city's prosperous Greenwood enclave. Although the history of the 2 days of violence that began on May 31st, 1921, was long unknown outside of the city, in recent years, Tulsa has engaged in a reckoning over the events. So they're exhuming the bodies of this. It also later on goes on to say, for the 6 sets of remains that were examined, the research team has identified surnames of interest for potential relatives in Oklahoma, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. If a member of the public sees their surname flagged and has a family history in Tulsa, they are being asked to contact the team at tulsa1921dna.org. You can click onto the link and that will take you directly to that particular forensic study. I also put on the forensic studies, the link on my page. So whether you go directly to the page or just click on the my page, you'll see the same link that will take you there. What I would like to also highlight is on earlier times on the same, on my website, you have the Black Aboriginal bodies killed and dumped in Tulsa, admitted by white police, still not recovered. During the Tulsa massacre, white mobs were taking children and killing them on sight, taking women, raping and killing them, grabbing Black men and pulling them apart by automobiles, shooting Black people in the back, and then dumping them in mass graves. Again, this is not the cemetery. These are mass graves that are being found right now that people are coming to admit. Stealing their property, sanctioning by the United States government, that still has not properly compensated Black Indians and Black people for the travesty of this genocidal act. So I like to go to this clip and let's see what this retired police officer has to say about the bodies that are in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Let's see what he says. This is from Fox News in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Could be buried. I'm just west of downtown Tulsa, and I talked to the former police officer before a couple of years ago. He told me he knew he was near the location then, but now that he's been able to see this area from above, he's convinced this is it. When we talked last time, I remember you said, I'm not sure we're in the right place. I feel like we're close. It's somewhere in this area. Do you feel positive about? I'm sure it's right down here. Former Tulsa police officer Robert Patty says back in the 1970s, he saw photos of bodies from the 1921 Tulsa race massacre. From what you remember of the photos, how many bodies total do you think? I placed the number at 100. Robert says his supervisor showed him photographs one night at the station and warned him not to tell. He said, don't ever say a word about anything you saw in those pictures. He said, at least not as long as I'm alive. And we shook on it, and I never said a word to anybody as long as he was alive. Why did he say that? He thought that the city of Tulsa would be so mad and so upset and so troubled over those pictures being discovered that they might end my life and end his too for having been responsible for showing them to me. Historians tell me they think in the days and weeks after the massacre, some police officers went to local businesses and confiscated photographs that showed terrible things that happened. Pictures of people being butchered, being hung in their front yard, being pulled apart between automobiles. It was horrible. These were people that maybe went to the store and never came home. These were people that were running and got shot in the back. These were people that were asleep in their homes and got drug out of their bed and hung on their trellis. When you first saw those photographs, what did you think? Humans didn't do this. Animals did this. It's hard to grasp, and I'm a combat veteran. This was the devil dancing in the streets. This was absolutely no mercy, no conscience. It's haunted me for half a century. Robert says another packet of photos showed a trench dug that he thinks was right here and piles of bodies. Tell me what you saw in those photos. They were dumping bodies down the hill, and there was pictures of men pushing these bodies in wheelbarrows over the railroad tracks. They were also people shoveling foot pine into the ditch. They were dumping them.
So my question is, they're talking about doing these studies and what was taking place in the cemetery. Where's the independent delegations that are going to Tulsa to look for these black bodies that are in the mass graves that aren't even in a cemetery?
Talk about it.
Where are the DNA studies that are connecting those black bodies and those surnames? What about the black bodies of those people who are being snatched and ripped apart and being murdered and shot in the back? He said himself, it was the damn devil dancing in the street. Where are these bodies and where are these voices and where are these people? Well, I'll let you know that Urban Indian Heritage Society is on the case. And if, God damn it, nobody else will do it, we'll get our own finders and we're going to find those bodies to make sure that we're able to make sure that their souls will be at rest. I yield the floor.
Can I ask one question?
Sure
What
can,
about
Mr. Waltho.
the so-called white folks that died that day? Where they bodies at? See, I always make it sound like these people wasn't able to defend themselves, and I'm gonna reject that idea every time. If you have black bodies, then you're gonna have some white bodies too.
That's
Where
right.
they at?
This is what I said
And
earlier. This is the
and wait a minute.
go ahead.
Okay. Now we know that it is tradition that when you pass, you generally go home and be buried in the cemetery that your ancestors are buried in. Why are they up there looking for bodies in Tulsa when they need to be going back off into the nations and looking at these cemeteries and these so-called all black towns and seeing how many of them bodies are there? See, the whole concept of them looking in Tulsa to find us buried in Tulsa just kind of blows my mind. All those people would have had families. All those families would have came from inside the Indian territory. The majority of those bodies would be back with their ancestors and not thrown into a mass grave in Tulsa. Who is really in those daggum graves?
What I would say is this: for that man to say that his chief swore him to secrecy, and that he has the actual photos that he's seen in the 1970s of that, we have to do our due diligence.
Yes, and I'm agree with you right there. We have to do our due diligence. That is true. But we also have to do due diligence with the concept of how the people were living at that time.
Absolutely right. I agree with you 100%.
You see what I'm saying? So while they're looking there to find these people that were killed during this massacre, my point is, why aren't you down here checking these cemeteries that these people would have came from?
Mr. Waltho, do you think it's because they don't have a full grasp of the historical context, or do you think it's purposeful that they
It's
are
purposeful.
okay?
It's purposeful. You ain't even gotta ask that question. They're doing it on purpose. They don't want to find them people. They're not really looking for them people. Them
And that
cemeteries in Tulsa are extremely old. Now, my son is buried down here in Chickasaw Nation, and my grandson. We just went down there Sunday for the Memorial Day thing. There's graves in that cemetery that go back to the time of the Trail of Tears. So you're looking at graves from 1834, 1836, 1837. You got graves all the way back till then. These people come home when they die. These people had families. Do you gonna want me to believe that these people's families don't recognize that Uncle Charlie ain't showed up in a couple months? We talk pretty good here in Oklahoma. If it happens here in Oklahoma City, it don't take but a minute for it to get to Tulsa. And back in 1921, they had a party line. So one report would have hit a whole town at the same time. These people didn't go back to claim their relatives. These people never went up there to look for their folks. It just don't fit right. It don't fit right with the context of the times that they were living in. Majority of them people would not be in Tulsa, buried in no mass grave, because we wouldn't leave our people laying in no mass grave like that. That don't happen. People without families, that may happen too. But them people were Indians. They knew who their family were. They knew where they came from. And those cemeteries have been long established. Just like the cemeteries in Tulsa have been long established. There's graves in there that you don't even know that there's graves right there no more. Who are they digging up? That's what I want to know. Who are they digging up?
what I would say is this: in our communities, there's a pattern that takes place. I know for a fact that they put corporations over the bodies, black indigenous bodies in Louisiana and Alabama. I know for a fact. They had
But
families.
hold on. Let me put this little line in there for you. Ish. We're not talking about states. We're talking about Indian territory.
Yes, sir. But my point is this.
Indian territory follows certain rules when it concerns burials.
Yes, sir. Those rules were out the window when they started dropping bombs on those people. They used the
That
United
is
States military who were working complicit with, you just heard, the police people who actually have photos of them doing it.
yeah, the police bombed them, but they
That's
had to bomb
correct.
them because they was losing to them.
So what I'm saying is that there's a conspiracy, and the conspiracy are those who conspire in order to do so. So that same pattern of what took place in Oklahoma is consistent with the same pattern that takes place in Louisiana, Alabama, Carolinas, and all over where it concerns our people. No different than if you were flooding them out, you would bomb them out and you would cover it up the same exact way. So it's all hands on deck for what's taking place in the black townships, as well as what was taking place in Tulsa underneath a highway by a railroad track. The same principle applies. It's all hands on deck, and we all need to be in motion.
I'll agree that we do need to look into this because that other side of that story has still got to be told, and I'm in full
Yes,
agreement
sir.
with that. Is
Yes,
that you would not have an argument out of me one way or the other
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
on that
I
point.
understand. I
On
understand.
on that point, but just like you gonna have graves full of us folks, you gonna have graves full of them folks too. They only had to bomb that area because they couldn't take that area any other way.
There's wisdom in that statement, and I agree with it 100%.
Okay, now if they tried to take that area by ground and couldn't do it, where them people at? The ones that was trying to take it. Because when they come in there, I'm telling you, these guys was crack shots. I was raised amongst these people.
And they were soldiers. Most of them was retired
They,
soldiers.
yes, they were not scared of pulling a gun
That's why
and
they went to the
defending themselves.
courthouse. That's exactly why they went to
Yes,
the courthouse, 100 strong, demanding that y'all hand that little boy over. We'll take protection of him until the court.
that's
That's
right.
right. And when they first came, the way the story is told, when they first came as 100 of them, it scared the crap out of everyone, and they left. But they gave a time that they were coming back, and they came back with double the amount of people, and this is what started the insight at the riots. So while I do believe, and I kind of feel like both things are true. I think both situations I think will wash out. That we are going to find some people that they didn't want us to, because how do you have the big bad white man story if there's mass graves of white folks, right? We
Exactly.
can't really sell that story. However, I don't believe you're gonna find no Africans in no mass graves out there. So who's left but the business owners and the families and the people in that area? And depending on how it affected each family, it sounds like they were wiping out whole households, right? So who was coming for those people, especially the ones that migrated to the area? Like some of those families that we see that were business owners that came into the area, bought businesses between the period of 1902 and 1908 when the boom was happening, right? Now their families had to get word that something happened, that their family went west. They ended up in Oklahoma. They were doing well. Next thing you know, their house was on fire and all the family was gone. Where did their bodies go? There's some answering
And
to do.
you would have that circumstance, I'll admit. But the vast majority of people came from somewhere down off in Indian territory. And as you're gonna have a hard time making me believe that them people didn't go get their people back. Now, as far as them big bad white boys just running through there tearing up Tulsa, you'll never make me believe that. My grandpa could strike a match from 50 yards with a 22 rifle anytime you wanted him to, anytime. And he had a whole slew of buddies that was just as good as he was. So they should have took some casualties too. See what I'm getting at? Whose
Yes, indeed.
bodies are they looking for? Now they got to come out here to the public and say, hey, can't y'all tell us who these people is? Well, I thought you knew who they was. See, I'm kind of conflicted with that because they give you one side of the story and they tell you that these white folks just did whatever they wanted to do. And I know these people down here, and you ain't never at no time been able to do just whatever you want to do to these people. And they was very, very clannish. So if you do something to my relatives, you have to deal with me too. And those families in those days, I got an aunt that was having babies at that time. She ended up with 22 kids. Have another aunt that had 16. Have an aunt that had 18. My grandmother had 8. These were not little families. These is big families. And all of them got attitudes. So kill one and see if you don't get a visit from another one. And you don't know where they gonna come from. You say people moving into Tulsa, well, you got to accept the fact that people would have been moving from places like Ardmore and Gene Autry and Broken Bow and Idabel into Tulsa, right? So all these people wouldn't be people from coming out of state into Oklahoma setting up these businesses. These still would have been the Indians on the vast majority of the numbers from right here in Oklahoma. And there's just no two ways around that fact. Now, like I said at first, you got people who in the military would be considered marksmen today against a group of ragtags. What them bodies at? And who is them bodies? How come they don't never tell you about how many white folks got killed that day? They can give you almost an exact number of how many of us folks got killed that day. But they ain't never told you how many of them other folks got killed that day. And those numbers would be somewhere in the same number as us folks, because they were losing the battle. They were taking casualties on the battlefield, and the only way to stop them from taking any more casualties was to bomb them from the air. Otherwise, they didn't stand a chance. It shows you how weak their position was when they came into the area. Now they come into the area in a weakened position against people who know exactly what they're doing in their own homes. The worst place you could ever try to attack me is in my house. Everything in my house will turn into a weapon. I'll take a slingshot and hit you between the eyes if I have to. Where them bodies at? Why ain't nobody talking about them bodies? Why they keep you studying on this side when they never talk about what was happening on the other side? See, this story can't be told until the whole story is told. So, just like it said, I'm all for them going in there and finding these bodies. And let's tell the whole story instead of just telling this one-sided story that makes them look good and makes us look weak.
And I'm with Mr. Waltho 100%. We can't romanticize and make it seems like some big old white man came through like a whirlwind, and as if black people wasn't even fighting back. That's not even. That's an out and out lie. I agree with
That's
100%.
it's outrageous. It is outrageous And that is the problem because they done took this story, which actually needs to be told. You see what I'm saying? And changed it to a whole different narrative to push another narrative that they trying to push and have been trying to push since 1866. So
So we can.
we can agree on the fact that we need to figure out who's in these graves if they got these graves. You see what I'm getting at? I'm in agreement with that. But I don't believe it's just gonna be us folks that you gonna find in them graves. And when we start finding people other than us folks in those graves, then this other side of the story has got to come out. And let's redeem our ancestors to who they really are. These people fought back. And they fought back so good that they had to bomb them from the sky
That's right.
to stop them. So let's go with issues idea and let's start digging up shit.
Yeah, we have a right.
And let's
Let's
look
look
and
and
see.
They're not doing
But
it, so we have a right.
let's tell the real whole entire story. See what I'm getting at? Let's put the
Absolutely.
whole thing out there. Let's not just put this one side that looks kind of ridiculous on the surface. They tell you where they bombed them from the sky. Well, why would they have to bomb them from the sky if they was running through the streets? Wouldn't they be bombing their own people then? The only reason why they would have to go to the sky is because they was losing on the ground. Watch modern warfare right now. They have to control the sky to control the ground. They were losing, and they must have been taking heavy casualties. And I hate to have to use the word must because that story has been shrouded in so much secrecy that we really don't know. So the secret ain't on Black Wall Street, as they call it. The secret is on what happened on Black Wall Street because they ain't telling the whole story. They don't never tell you about them folks. They ain't never gave you a body count on them folks. They ain't never gave you a name on them folks. All they give you is this one-sided ass story.
And they took it so far as to go ahead and, as Brother Ish talked about, is to take the last survivors and honorarily give them African or Ugandan citizenship. So the narrative
Ghana
is not
citizenship.
stopping.
Yeah.
Ugandan, yeah, it's not stopping. They're continuing the narrative.
Well, they was continuing it when we had to send out them letters over there to the Indian Affairs Committee too. Only now, instead of trying to ride down the street and do it, they trying to do it in the Congress. But the outcome is still the same. We end up with the land, y'all end up with nothing. From their perspective. What do you think they was doing in Greenwood? We take all of this, y'all get nothing.
And I
Same
like
game.
and I like to add that they almost killed our elder by on that plane ride to Africa. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of that part of the story. That she became very ill on that trip, which was a
Yeah.
very unnecessary travel in the first place.
But they had to sacrifice her to do what? Push a narrative. What's the narrative? Article 2 African. See, that narrative always go back to that Article 2 African. But I tell you one damn thing, and the tribes ain't got no chance of doing this no more than the federal government got no chance of doing this. You can't find an African in them people's bloodline. And you certainly ain't gonna find one in 1898.
Mr. Waltho, you guys, I think this is the perfect segue to kind of see if we can get some questions from the audience. If we may have time for one or two questions. If anybody wants to come on stage while we have Mr. Waltho with us, it's 9:44 in Muskogee territory down here in Georgia. And so I want to just make sure we have some time allotted to get some questions in. So I don't know how we're able to do, but if we can get anyone that has any questions, if you want to come up, please do. We can put a link in the chat to invite you up and ask your question to anyone on the panel. Or and also in the chat, y'all let me know what y'all think about the build so far. Are you guys enjoying this build? Because I know I am. Lots of jewels been dropped. I hope you guys have been sharing out the video, hitting up that like button, tapping the like button. Um, y'all have sent an invite to the chat. Y'all know I don't know how to work it. I don't know how to work it. But I do want to get an opportunity to get, maybe one or two questions in real quick as we get ready to try to round off the evening.
I'm game.
And while we're getting
I'm
that
game
set
also.
up, guys, please feel free to add your questions in the chat if you, while we're getting the link together.
I just want the whole story to come out. I'm tired of this narrative that they keep pushing on us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And it's always the same narrative and it's always pushing back to the same place. But they ain't got nothing to ride on but this narrative. And we can see that the narrative is false. So we do have things we need to understand. We do have things we still need to learn. But we need to learn it all in a context of where it was at and what was going on. Don't give me half the story, give me the whole story. How many of them folks took a bullet to the head trying to come down that street that first time? They make it sound like we a bunch of punks over here. You can just do whatever you want to us. Just run through the territory and shoot them all if you feel like it.
That's been the narrative, huh? Your grandma,
Yeah.
your dad, your grandpa watch your grandmama get raped and beat up.
Yes.
The whole thing has always been this story of defeatism.
Trauma bonding.
It would also be what are your actual priorities? You would actually take a 102-year-old and a 107-year-old, fly them all the way over to Ghana when you actually could have, as an organization, done fundraising, hired your own forensic scientists, and probably identify a whole lot of mass graves of people, whether in cemeteries or outside of cemeteries. You could have been doing
Exactly.
that. Or how about this? You can still do it now. You can be doing fundraising in a creative way where the people will come and donate and assist you in getting your own narrative and ironing out the facts in order to ascertain that truth. If you would just, what are your priorities? Are you just going to
The
sit
pro-
here and try to make these people and paint these American Indians in kente cloth? Or, God damn it, are you
yes.
going to do your job so that you can actually identify the bodies and control your own narrative? How about
Well,
that?
here's the deal. Here's the deal: is they are doing their job. So their job is not to actually identify these people. Their job is to identify and push a narrative.
Understood.
So they doing what they're paid to do. And you can't say they're not doing their jobs when they're doing exactly what their job description tells them that they're supposed to be doing. Don't make it true. Don't make it a fact. It's just a narrative.
And we can wake up the fact that also because of our wonderful 44th president, all of the literature now says African American.
Thank
Anything
you.
you pull up online, of course, and we're not talking about actual documents from the time, but any documents that talk about that history are talking about what African Americans did, what African Americans went through on Black Wall Street in Little Africa.
Y'all are on fire tonight. Oh my goodness. It looks like I don't think we have any questions. It doesn't like anybody needed to come up. So that tells me that the information was so in depth and so thorough that it kind of doesn't leave too many rooms for questions other than the ones you stated, like what them bodies at, amongst others. So I think what we'll do is you guys have really brought out a lot of information. If there's anything else that you feel would be impactful for this build, we'll round out some closing comments and get ready to wrap it up so we can make this 10 o'clock hour. And again, I'm gonna say for me, I close out and say I appreciate everyone for pulling up to the build. Please do make sure that you share out the video and hit us with a like, help us connect algorithms. And especially if you have ancestry coming out of Oklahoma or any of these areas nearby, you want to make sure you start talking to your family, start discussing that family tree and any history you can find out via your family, and then take that deep dive and start looking through these archives and looking through these documents that are housed in some of these archives, and see what you can put together and try to shed a little bit more light on your family's experience outside of just the black narrative. Look beyond the black smoke. So with that, I'm gonna mute my mic and leave it to the rest of my panel to give us some closing words, and then we're gonna head on out, y'all.
What I'd like to say is, I would definitely like to thank you, Sister Sooth. You did a beautiful job of hosting this evening, keeping the flow of the show, and you did an absolutely wonderful job. So thank you so much, sis. Also, Sister Latasha, I thank you so much. Your information was clear, it was concise, and it was so very informative. I thank you for adding such a divine spirit and balance to the conversation and just the whole vibration of the room. I salute you, sis, and I thank you for that. Also, our esteemed guest, Mr. Waltho, you did an absolutely amazing job of just adding so much wisdom and so much overall clarity to the topic, as well as the firsthand experience of understanding the Oklahoma history and a topic of something that's so, in time, um, with it being the 31st, and today. I thank you so much, Elder, for just taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and share such wisdom with us, as well as doing it in the right spirit. Cousin Phoenix Moon, I thank you so much for hosting, such a wonderful topic, and also the Urban Indian Heritage Society as a whole. You all are so priceless. I thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this, as well as just to share any information on the platform itself. And that's what I want to say. Thank you so much.
I couldn't say it any better, Brother Ish. It is an honor and a true pleasure to work with you, sir, on a daily basis, and the Urban Indian Heritage Society in a whole. It is a completion of my life's mission. Sooth, as you know, sis, you are amazing. Thank you for this opportunity to give this information. And Phoenix, you already know. A lot of this information wouldn't be possible for us to spread it in this way without your foresight and your thought process to get into this game so many years ago. So we just want to thank you all, the audience, everyone that's a part of Urban Indian Heritage Society, those who are listening and those who will listen on a share. This information is very important. It's very important to our culture and our history. And Mr. Waltho, we can't thank you enough. You're a treasure and a gem to our community. We appreciate you all.
Absolutely. We also would be remiss if we don't make sure that we acknowledge them again to any person of the past who dealt with these events that took place in 1921 in the Greenwood district. Especially if any of these are your ancestors, we just want to make sure we acknowledge them, we honor them, and let them know that we will not stop talking about this. We're going to make sure the light stays shown on the truth so that they will not be erased under a cloud of black smoke. So shout out to everybody that pulled up. Y'all make sure y'all check out our website, www Urban Indian Heritage Society.org. Make sure you're following the YouTube channel. Make sure you're following us on Twitter at UIHS.org. That's UIHSORG. We're on Facebook as well. So make sure you hit us up on Facebook. And until then, we will bid you all a good night. Make
Mr.
sure you
Waltho
share.
did say that he was back, sis. I'm
Oh,
not
did
sure
he?
where
No,
he's
I'm
at.
sorry. I didn't see that. There he is, Mr. Waltho.
All right. I messed up my phone. Y'all gotta forgive me. Either me or this phone done lost our damn minds. Uh, but I see y'all getting ready to close out, so I just say thank y'all for letting me have an opportunity to speak. And I hope we get a chance to sit down and discuss this in more detail later on. All of y'all have a good evening, and I'm gonna sit down because my feet hurt.
Well, Mr. Waltho, we wanted to let you know. I don't know if you got a chance to hear us while you were getting back, coming back in, but what we were doing was thanking you for taking time out of your busy schedule. We certainly do respect that. The wisdom of
Absolutely.
what you pour over to us and what you share and impart to us is something that we do not take for granted. We know that it's a very valued position that we're in, and we thank you again so much for taking time to spend that with us, sir.
Well, I always enjoy talking to y'all, and I really like talking to you. Ish, we need to sit down and have us a good long conversation one day here pretty soon. Uh, but all I can say is thank y'all, and y'all have my gratitude for at least being here, willing to listen.
Yes, thank you so
Absolutely,
I
much.
Miss Waltho. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Uncle Waltho. You know we love you.
do. And I hope we get to do it again, folks.
I was gonna say, Mr. Waltho, if you're trying to hit a part two, then you ain't really got to say it too loud now. If you
Well,
wanted to
we
hit a
can do
part
it.
two or something.
We can do what we want to do in this game. We have an advantage now that they didn't have before, and that's the fact that we have lines of communications that we can open up and use at our discretion. So anytime that somebody comes up with a subject that we think we need to discuss, then we need to go ahead and bring it to the table and discuss it and try to at least get an understanding as far as we're concerned. I'm not too much concerned about these other folks, but I am highly concerned about the degree of understanding that we have amongst ourselves. And the only way we can come to this understanding and get these agreements is by having conversations with each other, if you understand what I mean. So if you want to do a part two, three, four, five, I don't care. And from, I don't know, 6 o'clock in the evening to about 10 o'clock in the evening, I ain't got a daggum thing to do. We can make it happen. You just let me know.
Absolutely, Mr. Waltho. We'll have to sit down and have a chat privately and see what we can put our heads together and see what we come up with.
Yeah, we need Mr. Waltho and Chief Warhorse on here. I love them too, like peanut butter and jelly. We
Come
need
on,
them.
Well,
somebody.
now
Come on.
I'm gonna let you. Wait a minute. Hold on. Hold on. I'm gonna let you in on something because
Yeah.
I was talking to Chief last night, and she informed me that me and her are going live together tomorrow.
Oh,
What?
that's
Oh,
perfect. That's perfect. Right on
awesome.
time.
Now, I don't know. You have to get with Phoenix or whatever to see about how you might go about getting a link or whatever. But it would be an interesting conversation for us to sit down and have this talk, you know, with more than just me and Chief talk all the time. We gonna talk to each other two, three times a day, easy. So this is just me and her having one of our regular conversations. But Amy seems to think that y'all need to hear what me and her talk about when we're just sitting down talking. Y'all come on over tomorrow and join us, and let's see how we can make this open up a little bit better.
Oh, it would be an honor.
Ooh, you ain't got to say no more.
Collard greens and
Uh,
cornbread, child.
how about
We'll
that?
be there.
Phoenix, hey boo, welcome, welcome, welcome. I know you've been in
Oh,
the background for
Seal,
Phoenix's
I was in the
house.
background
Hey,
enjoying
Phoenix.
See a Phoenix food.
our little corny productions in the background. How y'all doing? Y'all did such an awesome job as usual. I'm so excited. You know what I'm gonna say. Part two.
Right, right, right.
Right, right.
Anything but a chicken wing.
What's going on, Phoenix? How's the baby today?
The baby is doing well. She is doing so well, talking so much junk.
How's grandma doing?
Grandma's hanging in there. Grandma's doing her best.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I'm cool now.
Yes. You guys have an
long
awesome
as everybody's,
this week.
as long as everybody's okay, I'm good. That's for real. But I'm gonna get off here and let y'all go ahead and do what y'all gotta do, and
Okay.
we'll set this up whenever you get ready. Holler at me, so Phoenix,
You
you know
got it,
how to get
Mr.
a hold of me,
Waltho.
so that ain't no problem.
We appreciate you
Thank you
again,
so
Mr.
much.
Waltho. We ain't gonna hold you. We appreciate you, and if you guys have any questions or anything like that, Mr. Waltho is very accessible. You will see him in these streets, these internet streets. So, Mr. Waltho, if they did want to ask you any questions, did you want to share, like one of your social medias? That's if you feel like them hitting you
Uh,
up or not.
well, they know how to get a hold of me.
There you go. Enough
Hey,
said.
I'm on Facebook every day pissing somebody off.
Lord,
Just they
stay out of
won't let me
Facebook
in.
jail, Mr. Waltho.
Well, now I can. When Phoenix go to jail, then I can come out, and then when I go to jail, they'll let Phoenix out. So
Yeah, yeah.
either way, either way, you can get one of us if you look. But that's really the only social media. I got a Twitter thing, and I get over there about once a day, maybe if I'm lucky. But I get notifications on that Facebook nonsense. So just look up Waltho Wallace Wesley on Facebook. It's a little dude with the skull head, and you got me. You can send me through messages through my direct messenger on that messenger app that I use on Facebook. Is that good enough?
Okay. Yep, that sounds good, Mr. Waltho. That sounds good.
Sometimes you'll hear me on Clubhouse. I think there's a way you can message me over there on Clubhouse. So you look for me, you'll find me. I'm not hiding. I'm not hiding. I'm actually too big and too fat to hide. So
Lord, Mr. Waltho.
it's all right. I worked all my life for this girl. I'm enjoying it every minute I can.
You better live, Mr. Waltho. I know that's right. Well,
I'm gonna
listen,
live till I die. That's for sure.
I know that's right. I know that's right. All right. Well, you guys, I think that about does it. That about does it. And you know how we like to do all hearts and minds clear.
Yeah.
And so, all right. Well, then we're going to go ahead and get ready to close it out. You guys, we appreciate y'all for pulling up. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, share the video still, and follow us on our other social media handles. And we will catch you all in the next build. Y'all have a good night. Have a good night.
Cool, cool, cool.
Have a good night, everyone.